right, so without any further ado, let's get started. I have sponsors this year. In the year of 2022, every free session I run has a sponsor, and this month the sponsor is The Right Malloy. This is a coaching and editing service run by Carolyn Malloy, PhD. She's a book coach and historian. She's been advertising this month in Electric Speed. That's my free newsletter. You may have noticed her there. You can visit her site at therightmalloy.com, and she offers a discount for people who are watching this. So if you're interested in book coaching, then take a look at her site and get 15% off with the code Jane. So thank you, Carolyn. I really appreciate your support of this program. All right, so let me introduce you to Sarah. Sarah has an established author website, which if you're curious about that, you can certainly check it out as we go along. You'll find her blog there, of course, at sarahbirnbach.com. She has a memoir coming out this year that you're going to learn about as we go, A Daughter's Kaddish. This is going to be released in September. And she, full disclosure, she was a client of mine some months ago. I think it might be years now, how the time flies. And we consulted with her before she had a specific publication date. I think at that time, Sarah, you were starting to blog, or you were blogging about achieving your best self. You're now blogging about ways to combat racism. So if you go to her blog right now, you're going to see the racism related posts. If you go far enough back into her archive, you're going to see some of that original material. And Sarah right now is currently at about 700 subscribers, which she can reach via email. And that's, again, I mentioned earlier, the email blog line is very blurry, and we're going to be addressing that. When Sarah applied for Business Clinic, she said, or she framed her challenge in this way. She says, I think I have to switch my blogging focus to grief, father-daughter relations, the importance of ritual, spirituality, etc., which are the themes of my memoir. So Sarah, I'd like to give you a chance now to talk about where you're at in your author journey. Tell us a little bit about your book and your hopes for the blog and what you're struggling with currently.
What I'm currently struggling with is how to use the blog to market the book. I have always in my professional adult life tried to enable people to be their best selves in whatever capacity they live, whether it's their professional capacity, their personal life. And so when I started blogging, I was blogging on ways that people could become their best selves. But when George Floyd was murdered, I tried to think about what I, as one privileged white woman, could do to combat racism in the country. And that's when I started writing every week about ways to combat racism. Now I send that out as a newsletter, but I also put it on all of my social media, my Facebook page, my Twitter page. I put it on my website. So I think of it as a newsletter, but when I put it on my social media, then I think of it as a blog. I don't want to give up working to combat racism, but with a launch date coming very soon for my memoir, I want to figure out how to use these avenues to market my book. You asked, what's it about? After my father died, I undertook what is typically a male tradition to recite the mourner's Kaddish prayer for him twice a day, every day in synagogue. My father believed that that would redeem his soul and that God would look upon his soul favorably. Now, the tradition is for sons to do that. My father had no sons. And my father asked me to hire a male to recite the Kaddish for him. And I chose to do it for him because my job required me to travel all over the country. I had all kinds of different experiences Some places my prayer practice was outright rejected. Some places I was embraced. And my memoir is the story of that year when I traveled and tried to honor my father's soul.
Excellent. So, Sarah, I think one of the strengths of this particular project, this memoir, is that it's so focused on a particular year, a year with a very significant and identifiable challenge. And also there are like really clear themes that run through it that, as we're going to find out, really help with marketing and can help with blogging should you choose to continue to blog or to blog on this topic. So this is a strength that just is really going to help this conversation. And I say this because for those of you who may have a book coming out, if the topic or the theme is more indistinct or very broad, that actually makes the challenge much more difficult. So the more specificity we have, the easier this all gets. So we have that working for us. But the big question, Sarah, that occurred to me as I was looking at the problem you identified, and I agree, like it doesn't make sense to continue blogging on combating racism, as noble of an effort as that is. It doesn't make strategic sense in the context of what you have coming up this year to continue in that vein. But even more than that, I don't know if it makes sense to blog at all. Now, this isn't because I don't like it or I think it's dead. For those of you familiar with my work, you know that I blog. I have had a blog for 15 years now, so I'm certainly not against it. But I am very, I want to be very considered when I think about this for other people, the limited time they might have, and also kind of the framing of what the blog is or the point of the blog, especially in this context, which is to help support your book launch. So I put together this little chart that I hope will sort through starting considerations. And we're going to talk about some of these and pick them apart more fully. I'm going to start on the left-hand side of the column, arguments against blogging. I think the biggest one by far that I often tell people is that to really see the payoff, you need a years-long effort that's consistent in topic or focus. Sarah, you have the benefit of having your blog does go back years, but you've also switched things up during that time. And so I don't know that you necessarily have this recognizable name or brand associated, especially with the topic of your book.
Right.
So this is, falls into the negative category or into the negative consideration. But more important, I think, is that because you're writing a memoir, and certainly we could talk about other books you have to write, but if you're writing memoir or often novels, I think it's harder to break through the barriers that make blogging, that eventually lead to blogging success. And we're going to talk more about those in a minute. The other thing about blogging is I don't know that if you're doing it strategically or for a marketing purpose, it's a lot of effort. And it's effort that you could be putting elsewhere into either other writing activities or other marketing activities. And then finally, I think in your situation in particular, Sarah, the blog is going to have to be marketed with this new focus, unless you already had a large audience. Now you do have those 700 people, and we're going to talk about what you can do with those regardless. But when I'm thinking large audience, I'm really thinking, at least mid to high 4 figures, preferably 5 figures if we could get there. So you would have to be actively marketing the posts through social media or through direct outreach to people and asking them to share for those posts to do the book marketing work that you want them to do. Now, the arguments for it, though, are here. Now, but before I get to that, Sarah, do you have any questions about that left side column, the red column?
I didn't hear you, Jane.
Oh,
what?
Did you have a question? And before I move to the green side, do you have any questions about the red side?
No, other than the fact that it does take time away. I spend 2 days a week doing the research for my newsletter every week. I mean,
Yes.
I publish it weekly, so that's also a challenge. Maybe I don't need to do it quite so often.
Right. So you, like other people I know, spend quite a bit of time on this. And so that there's an opportunity cost here to doing it if it's not achieving the results we want. So the arguments for it are that it is highly effective for book marketing if the audience is already there. So like in my case, where I have an established audience on my blog, they're going to be there no matter what. I can use my blog very effectively to market my own books or other people's books or classes or whatever I want, because it's just rock solid at this point. There's no question that I'm going to reach, maybe 5,000 people with an average blog post. The other plus is that you don't have to wait for acceptance from someone else. So there's no pitching and waiting, like trying to get coverage elsewhere. Although sometimes it's better to do, like the risk associated with that tends to have high rewards though, which we'll talk about that. Once you have your blog content up and published, it's content that you can reuse and repurpose in many different ways. There's value in that. And then for books that you might have coming out many years down the line, here I'm thinking, for the entirety of your writing career, however long that may be, this helps grow the platform for the next release. So I look at blogging as a very long-term activity here. And I noticed Yvonne asks in the Q&A about what about blogging after your book has been launched. Blogging is great marketing anytime. I think that, but it still is a long-term effort that doesn't typically have immediate short-term payoffs. I often talk about the long-term effects of doing anything, whether it's social media, blogging, email, like the interest compounds year after year if you're consistent and focused. So if you're just doing like a blog post here, a blog post there, and then dropping it for months and months at a time, I don't think it's a helpful marketing activity. And you'd want to look at alternatives, which we're going to discuss. Sarah, did you have something to say, Sarah?
No, I liked your sign. There may be trouble ahead.
Okay. So I want to talk specifically about the challenge related to memoir, and this can extend to fiction writers too. For memoir, often your readership isn't people who are going through the same experience. I mean, it could be, but usually the audience comes from people who are curious about your experience. So in your case in particular, Sarah, I think there are going to be very few audience members or readers who are like, oh yes, I tried that. I tried reciting the Kaddish for my father too for a year. Like you have a very unique premise. And so it's going to draw people who just want to see how that played out. Then the other challenge with blogging specifically is that the personal material that might be, you might be tempted to write in the form of blog posts that would complement the memoir, would get people interested in the memoir. It's not going to do well in Google search. And we're going to talk about why later and how like search engine optimization works. On the flip side, though, if you try to write content or write blog posts that are very informational in nature, that would have a better chance of showing up in Google search. And again, we'll talk about what that looks like. Like in your case, Sarah, I think this would be like blogging about how people can better grieve a parent. That's not necessarily going to sell your memoir. It's just going to attract people who are looking for coping mechanisms or looking for that help of moving through their grief. So there's a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of dynamic to some types of memoir, if you're looking at blogging as the way to do it, as the way to market it. So here's the other issue with blogging that relates to everybody, not just memoirists or novelists, and it has to do with the luxury of time. From my perspective, Sarah, with your memoir coming out in September, that gives you what, 6 months roughly? It's like just barely enough time, in my experience, to start gaining traction from a search engine optimization perspective. And the graphs I have here show what I mean. So these graphs show the traffic line of a very specific site that I had some students work on during the spring semester of 2016. This was at the University of Virginia. And the top line, notice how it gets bigger as we go. That is search engine traffic. That is Google sending the site traffic after it starts to better understand what's on the site and that people are actually getting their questions answered, or the site's content is meeting a need. So if you're doing your job well with your content, and I'm using content and blogging here interchangeably as terminology, your traffic grows as Google sees that you have something worthwhile. The bottom line, which notice it flatlines when the semester ends, this is social media traffic. So the students really pushed hard to get traffic to the site because their grades were at stake. And then when they were gone, there's nothing social media wise because no one was posting about the site anymore. So that just zeroed out. But notice it takes time. It takes time to grow that search engine traffic, but it's very powerful once you get the ball rolling. So your site needs the right content, the sort of content that will rank in search, and that has the potential to grow. So you have to hit a few things right to see this favorable trend line. And again, we're going to talk about some of those search engine optimization considerations as we go. Now, I want to talk immediately, though, about a really great alternative before we get into the search engine optimization discussion, guest posting. Now, Sarah, have you done any of this currently? Any, like, where you write for other sites? Nothing?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Have you even?
But I like the idea.
I like this idea too. But it does, some people have limited time and patience for pitching or for researching where to go. But I think it's very doable. And it also potentially preserves some of your time. The key, though, is to find the right outlet. It has to be an outlet that makes sense for the readership you want to reach. I mean, it only makes sense, but a lot of people tend to go to their friends, the organizations they already know, the places where they can get an easy yes, but the audience doesn't really match. So that's going to have limited effectiveness. So how do you find these perfect places? Well, it's just curiosity, and you have to research basically your competition or who you would be in collaboration with or who is complementary. A really good way to start this is to follow those people or places or sites on social media, because it just gives you a sense of their style and their voice. And if there's going to be a fit there, it's an education process to do that. Study what they're doing to help. This will help you better understand your audience and also help you come up with a better pitch for them or a better idea for their site or blog. It's going to inspire you and give you other marketing ideas. If you decide to continue some sort of blogging practice on your own, you could have a stretch goal of interviewing or featuring that other person on your own site. This is assuming that they're an influencer or someone big enough that this would make sense. And then the similar stretch goal, which I'm recommending here, is writing for these places, assuming there is an opportunity to do so. Most sites or blogs do have a guest post policy or submission guidelines that you can find. just looking at what they post and who the bylines come from, it's an immediate tip off of whether it's guests, inside contributors, just one person. And some places do pay for blog posts, not a lot, but some. All right, so there's one particular tool that I think makes quick work of this. It's called SparkToro. Some of you who follow my free classes may remember I did a session devoted to doing market research with SparkToro with the co-founder, Rand Fishkin, and that's available at my YouTube channel for those who are curious and want to see SparkToro in action. So it's like a search engine. It's a search engine for finding your audience. And I, before we got together for today's clinic, I went to SparkToro and searched for Kaddish. You could search for a lot of different terms. I'm not saying this is necessarily the right one, but I liked the specificity of it, and then it really obviously ties into your book. And so what SparkToro does is it tells you, okay, for this term, here are the social media accounts that are affiliated with it. Here are the accounts with really high engagement, and they try to surface something called hidden gems, which are really high quality accounts, but that aren't ginormous in size, right? And by ginormous, like the New York Times, you know, like they feel more accessible to the average person. Like you would be actually get a response from them if you emailed them. They also list websites people visit related to this term. Again, there's hidden gems, and there are more results that I'm not showing here. This is just a small example of all of the riches. It goes into podcasts and some other things that are very useful. Okay, so when I started looking at the results, what I really wanted to find was an individual. I wanted to find a person that I thought, Sarah, you might approach. And I was able to find one person, a rabbi. And this is still within SparkToro, because once you find a single lead, you know, you can click on it and then you get a whole other page of results about this particular person. It could be an outlet, like a media outlet. It could be a business. And it gives you all of the stats on that person. And if you're on the free plan of SparkToro, you won't get a full result page. You'll get a partial result page. But we see here that this rabbi is very active on Twitter, not so active anywhere else. And then the next logical step is to look at her website. Well, interestingly, this rabbi doesn't have a website. She has a Substack. She has a Substack email newsletter. Now, Sarah, are you familiar with Substack?
No.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know Substack, it's essentially just an email newsletter service. So, and I consider it the new way that people blog. So you can almost consider it interchangeable. If someone is blogging, they could be doing that same activity on Substack. If someone has a Substack newsletter, they could potentially be putting that same information on a blog. They're very, very, like the line between them is very fuzzy. And I see Nancy has a recommendation for you too, Sarah, about who to reach out to. So that's very cool.
Thank you, Nancy.
Laura is asking if Substack is like Medium, sort of, but not really. I mean, Medium is more like a website where you post your content. It's not going out via email. Substack, as of today, is email driven. And everyone is kind of like has their own little fiefdoms. Individuals have their own little newsletters on it. So the rabbi's newsletter is called Life is a Sacred Text. Some of her posts are free. Some of them are behind a paywall. That's another perk of Substack, is that you can charge subscribers to access certain posts. Now, I didn't dive more deeply than this, but this is the sort of opportunity that you're looking for. I don't know, like, my next questions would be, does she review books? I would definitely follow her on Twitter. Has she ever written about the themes or topics in your book? Maybe it makes sense to interview her at your own blog if she doesn't, do anything that gives you an opening, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this may not be the right opportunity, but I just want to demonstrate the research process that you would go through. Okay. So moving on, so that's the guest posting alternative. And there, you can research that for hours. Like you can find lots of different opportunities. And then I would expect, not 100% success rate. If you do outreach, depends on how good your outreach is, but, 10 to 20% success rate, maybe. It could be better depending on how targeted you get. In any event, moving on to your own blogging effort. If you don't have much traffic to your site, and I would say, Sarah, your site is in the low traffic category, but if you have strong social, you can build traffic more quickly because it just gives you a way to push people to the site or to your latest content very expeditiously. Here's an example of Julian Shapiro. He is really well known for doing these long Twitter threads that end with a call to action, as we see on the right. Go to my blog to see, my bigger list of starting principles. So this is one way to jumpstart traffic to a blog. But if your social media accounts are very low engagement or don't have many followers, this may not work that well unless you were a social media whiz and just understood how to connect all the dots and get your content seen by a lot of people, which is not what today's session is about. All right. Here's another example of repurposing blog content into social content. So this is using Instagram. I often take blog posts that appear at my site and then turn them into different like Instagram cards. The example we're seeing here are just static photos that are put into a photo post. But you could also do Instagram stories. You could do a reel. There's really no limitations here. It's to your comfort level and desire to make the creative. I use Canva for the creative on this. So they already have Instagram templates set up for whether it's a regular post, a story, or a video. Are you still with me, Sarah? Does that make sense?
I am, but every once in a while, I get a stuttering in the headset.
Oh,
so I don't hear you. But what I understand is that you take some of your blog content and put it on Instagram as a short, what you called a card, and that's something I could do easily.
Yes. Most people can do this very easily, especially with Canva, but they either don't think of it or they don't take the time. So Twitter threads, or go ahead, Sarah.
Or we don't know about it, which is why we depend on Jake Friedman.
Yes, that's why I'm here. I see Nidhi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She's asking if I think the newsletter space is getting saturated because there are a lot of personalities and courses, et cetera. They're all getting into newsletters. As with everything that gets popular, there's competition. And the main solution for that is to be very specific and focused on what your newsletter does, rather than going out broad and writing and talking about anything that pops into your head. The same thing applies to blogging. So, specificity, appealing to a very narrow audience is your biggest and best strategy for standing out. And we've got a reminder in the chat to remember to include alternative text with Canva graphics and captioning to make them more accessible. So thank you for that tip, Corinne. All right, let me move on to the SEO discussion, which sometimes this intimidates people, but it doesn't need to. So SEO is actually a very simple concept that that any writer can understand and employ for their website or for their blog. So, and I want to be clear here that I'm talking for the next, almost all of this session. In fact, I'm talking about business-oriented blogging, meaning blogging that builds your platform, maybe even earns you money over time. There are lots of reasons to blog that have nothing to do with those goals. So you can blog to support a cause, you can blog for creativity, you can blog as part of a community, just as part of a creative practice. Those are all wonderful reasons to continue, but I want to focus on the business reasons for the payoff. So it does mean paying some attention to search engine optimization and online writing best practices. So SEO has three components that I'll just describe briefly. There are technical considerations, which are outside the scope of this class. There are on-the-page considerations, which are entirely what this class is about. And then there are off-page considerations that are totally out of your control for the most part. Now, before I get to a deeper explanation of the parts that you need to know, I just want to say that all SEO starts with an understanding of what search intent means. Search intent simply means when people go to Google, what is it they want to do? Do they want to buy something? Are they looking for information? Are they looking to connect? What is it that they want? And so when you're thinking about what content to write, you need to kind of back things up and think about what are people searching for that I can provide? What are people searching for tangibly that my content will come up as a result, and they're going to be excited to see it and they're going to click on it. So most of the authors that I meet and talk with are not thinking about search intent. They're just thinking about what they personally want to write about. But for strategic blogging, you have to go to what your reader is looking for, what their search intent is when they're using a tool like Google. So for example, the search terms that bring traffic to my own website and blog, quite naturally, the list starts with my name. So some people go to Google searching for me specifically. And almost every author website, the number one search term that will bring people to you will be the name that you publish under. Almost everyone wins that unless your name is John Smith. But the other queries are the ones that I really want to tell you about. You'll see I've got query letter, how to write a query letter, how to get a book published, book proposal, Jane Friedman blog, query letter examples, how to write a book proposal, how to write a synopsis for a novel. These are all needs that people have. They need to learn how to write these, how to write them better. And my blog content comes up in search results as answering that need. So the numbers that you see here relate to how often it's searched for and how often my site wins those searches as far as people clicking on the result for my site. So this is what we want in most cases out of blogging. We want to suck in these people that are searching for content we have. All right, so back to the SEO breakdown. I mentioned that there's some off the page, meaning off of your website, considerations that affect whether or not Google will send you traffic. One of them is who links to you. So Google pays attention to if really high quality sites link to you, like the New York Times or whomever. The more high quality sources that link to you, the better your SEO. You don't have a lot of control over that, although there are lots of people you can hire who will try to help you get more links to your site, both fairly and unfairly. What your site is known for will affect your SEO. And by that, I mean my site, for example, is known for writing and publishing advice. If I start to blog tomorrow on perfume or how to buy an e-bike, or what's the best Chinese restaurant in New York City, even if I've written about those things on my site is not going to rank, at least in the near term, for those searches, because that is not what my site has become known for over time. So this is why, Sarah, switching topics, or for any blogger, when you're switching it up a lot, it doesn't give the internet universe time to acknowledge, hey, this site really knows its stuff on this topic. If you're doing lots of different things, that awareness doesn't have a chance to develop. Cite age here, probably the only time in your life where cite age or the age of something helps. So the longer your site's around and the older it gets, usually the more authority it gains because it's getting more links over time. It's got more content. And even as we saw with my student site, as it aged and as more people came to it, it gave Google more data about who actually wants to see this information. So time is on your side with your website. So the thing that is under your control entirely is the blog content that you're posting. So that's on the page. And there's some really easy parts of getting that right. I call it the metadata part. This is just, making sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's about how you're describing the information. That's a bit outside the scope of this session. I actually have another clinic session on how to relaunch a website that goes into the details of getting your metadata right. So I encourage people to go watch that session for the metadata discussion. What I want to focus on is the hard part, which is literally everything else, the writing itself, and having the right strategy in the first place. So this is like, Sarah, we're now like finally getting to the crux of the matter. What should you blog about? Should you be blogging about grief, spirituality? Like this part is the hardest by far. So let's take a look at your site. And I need to actually bring it up here. Give me just a second. I'm going to stop the share and share a different screen. All right, so everyone should now see a live version of Sarah's site. I'm going to click over to the blog. And the blog structure here is exactly what I would expect, where we've got the content well here on the left-hand side with excerpts, so the image and the excerpts, so we can scroll through the posts and see what's available pretty quickly before clicking on read more. And like we said, Sarah's focus recently is on combating racism. On the right-hand side, we have some information that complements the blog, which I always recommend for all bloggers, that you have like a list of your recent posts, that you make the archives readily available. I personally have my most popular posts listed on the right-hand side, as well as most recent comments, which shows people that it's an active blog and people are actively commenting. So here, I think what comes across immediately for someone who's, in the business of blogging is that all of the post titles are the same. This actually hurts you from an SEO perspective. Let's ignore the topic for the moment and just look at the headlines. Even if this were on the right topic, we've got some headline issues, and we'll talk more about writing headlines in a minute. Now, if we click into one of these posts, just choose the last one, we have some material that you've written about specific figures in women's history, and you're looking at noteworthy Black women. Now, these are pretty lengthy posts, which is not a bad thing. I think long blog posts do great. Now, can you tell me what your thinking was in, like, you've got a 4-parter so far. How did you decide who you wanted to cover and in what order, and how did you group them together?
I grouped them together alphabetically. I decided who to include by narrowing the field from a larger field of accomplished Black women. And I used the first few weeks of Women's History Month to highlight women of the past. And the last one, which isn't up here, which will go out, is contemporary women. And those photos are in color as opposed to sepia or black and white. I also used as a choice point women I had not written about before, because I have, over the last almost 2 years, written about accomplished Black women in other contexts. There are so many, so I picked the ones that I thought were most noteworthy, and had to do a lot of chopping.
So the content here, like, it's clearly well thought through, it's well written, it's informative, but it has what I consider very little in relation to blog content that even if this were your key area, like if your book were dealing with this, I don't think that this content would necessarily help you. And there are a few reasons for that. And I'm going to go back to my slides here. There we go. I think the biggest by far is that the posts are written kind of in the what I would consider very kind of neutral, informational, almost encyclopedic, like Wikipedia in some instances. They're factual. But blogging, as it stands today in any event, usually has a really strong point of view or voice to it, which then leads people to share it because there's something there that just the expression of it, usually the emotion of it, compels people to do something with it and to give it to other people. Not all blogs are going to have like that really strong voice component, but a lot of them do. For those,
some of mine do.
Okay.
This Black History Month and Women's History Month, they are more encyclopedic, but I have written blog posts about helping to curb the eviction rate, particularly among Blacks, and many of them have a call to action that people can actually do something about. Many of the blog posts do have that, but you're right, the last 2 months, because it was a particular month of honoring Blacks and women, I chose to write that way. But you're absolutely right. The last 2 months have been very encyclopedic and don't have a call to action.
I do see this issue consistently across lots of author blogs. And I don't know why it is. I think maybe it has something to do with like people have more of a comfort level. Maybe. I'm not sure.
I can speak to that.
Okay.
For me, writing weekly, it's hard to address a need or solve a problem every single week. Yes. I can only write about evictions, criminal justice so many times.
Right.
And I have written about many of those issues or problems that need to be solved several times because it's going on now for 2 years, almost 2 years.
Right.
So one of the reasons that I have sort of every couple of months, I just go into, okay, what do I write this week?
Yes. I think for people who blog today, often it's current events, the news cycle, the latest flare up on Twitter that tends to power writing on blogs and Substacks, newsletters alike. I'm not saying you should do that, but I know that probably some people are wondering, how do you get out of this trap of writing about the same thing over and over and over again, which I certainly relate to, being in the writing and publishing community and writing on that topic for so long that do I have anything new to say on social media at this point? I do, but sometimes I don't feel like writing about it because it's been done to death. So that's certainly one of the issues that comes up with blogging, is figuring out how to make the old new again and making and igniting your own enthusiasm and figuring out ways to keep things fresh for yourself. So, the next bullet point here is, some blogs will focus on content that addresses a need or solves a problem. That's not what your content in the recent couple months is doing. We're going to see some examples of different headlines and different pieces of content that are more about that. Certainly my blog is about that. But just to clarify, like, I think your headlines had maybe honoring in the title. And for when we look at headlines to click on in social media, they're not clickable because they're not honoring, it's a soft word. I am not criticizing the intent of your posts or the content. It's just, I'm just looking at it from, is this going to accomplish what you need it to? And I think right now it's too soft and informational. The larger problem, of course, as you've noted, is that the audience for your book, there's not a match here, and I'm not even sure who the audience is for this informational content, other than maybe your peers or people who've already just obviously subscribed to see what you have to say. So usually, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to see liftoff with a blogging effort, you've got to get really narrow, be really niche about what you're trying to accomplish. And I add for us mere mortals here, because if you're a celebrity or a really well-known name, you can basically write about whatever you want, including what you had for breakfast, and it will do well. But for those of us who don't have that sort of name and lights quality, you usually have to go very narrow to gain traction. And then as your platform grows, you have more leeway to write about what you want. And then you would need to put some thought into the SEO or keyword research, which we're gonna, let's see. Okay. You would have to think through this search intent exercise in a strategic way, and then think about what will people be searching for that I could blog about that I might have a chance at ranking for. You're not going to be able to rank for something like best Jewish memoir or best spirituality memoir, because that's too broad. There's too much competition. But you might be able to rank for something that's more niche, or something related maybe to women reciting Kaddish. I don't know. I haven't looked, but that's something you would want to, go to Google and start looking for some of these really super specific terms to see what else is out there, and if you have a chance of ranking. And by chance, I mean the New York Times isn't sitting in that top spot, or some Huffington Post, or some huge site that you know about, but that when you actually struggle to come up with a decent result for your search term, that's when you know you have a chance. And then finally, we need really well-crafted headlines. You would not want to have very similar sounding headlines like part 1, 2, 3, usually under any condition, unless, I mean, there's some exceptions, but certainly not, this case is not an exception I would consider. Did you have something to say, Sarah?
No, just I should have talked to you a year ago.
Better late than never. Okay.
That's right.
So I want to talk about the headline issue, because this is something that I consider like easiest to fix for most folks. Now, I think, Sarah, the content that you put together, it would actually be hard to headline it in a better way just because of what the content looks like. But you want to be thinking in terms of headline form when you brainstorm. What am I going to write about? I think in terms of headlines. What's going to get people excited? What will people click on and share?
This sure makes it look boring.
well, that's that's good. You see what the issue is, right?
Yeah. Well, it's consistent.
It is consistent.
I actually thought that consistency was important. So I'm learning something here.
So here I looked for, I think I looked for Kaddish. I can't remember the exact term I used. I may have just put Kaddish into Google News. Google News is slightly different from standard Google search. I would try both whenever you're doing some keyword research to see what else is out there. But I chose news because I wanted to see like what sort of articles were being published on this topic, media writers, authors on this topic. The top one recently was from the Chicago Tribune, which is pretty interesting. Notice the headline: I run Kaddish by leaving stones on Jewish graves during runs. It's very intriguing. I might click on that. How to maintain your connection with the deceased parent, saying Kaddish for my father. Jewish Kaddish rituals as an atheist. 16 Kaddish facts every Jew should know. People love numbers. We like lists, listicles, as they're called. But notice, the uniqueness. We also get a sense of just a little bit of the author's voice or angle on the topic from the headlines alone. There are also associated images here. The metadata actually for these posts, the metadata here would be like the associated image and then the little snippet of text under the headline. Normally you want that text to be readable and make sense. Some of these, not so much. So that's something that you as a blogger can modify and make it appear really good just by having the right metadata there. Okay. So this, I hope, this is something that you can do to brainstorm on your own what to write on your site by seeing what others have written and you'll find issues of disagreement or things that you want to talk about or build on. Maybe some of these writers, there's some collaboration there or an opportunity to do something together. You never know. Like this is kind of they're partly a literary citizenship exercise because these people might be readers of your book and you might want to read what they're writing. So yeah, hopefully it gives you some fodder if you want to blog, or it gives you an indication of where to go to publish essays or pieces if you don't blog. So the other thing I want to just briefly touch on is that writing online is a skill that gets developed. I find it very different from like something that if I'm writing for a print magazine, if I'm writing something that I know is destined for print first, like a book, very different approach than when I write for my blog or I write a newsletter. The first sentence really, really matters. People will abandon you after the first line or they're just skimming, they're just looking for the one or two nuggets that will wake them up and then they're gone. And you don't fight against this impulse. It's human nature. We're all a little distracted when we're online for the most part. So you just lean into people's tendency to skim. You break up the text, you use subheads. One sentence paragraphs will jump out, use them liberally, bold the really important points. Make sure that people take away the good stuff, even if they don't slow down. So always think about that when you're composing. Make sure before you hit publish or schedule, you look and see, is this a wall of text? Or have I helped draw out the most important points for people? Often the things that you highlight or quote are exactly the things that people will put in onto Instagram or that they'll tweet and share. So you can guide people's hand in that way if they see something juicy they want to share. All right, so let me talk about alternatives, because I think, Sarah, there would be, I don't think there's maybe enough time for you to launch a meaningful blogging effort. And just the work involved to me, I think would be better focused on other types of book marketing, given that you have 6 months to plan. I would be focused outward rather than focused on building the blog itself. So I would think about a guest posting strategy for well-established blogs. In the writing community specifically, I think Brevity and LitHub could be potential outlets if you're writing about the writing and publishing process, and you may have some interesting things to say on that count. Brevity is a creative nonfiction outlet that might be a good fit for an excerpt or something about something that's in the memoir. You can pitch or write articles for websites with lots of traffic. Here, if you need help with how to pitch effectively, there's something called the Byline Bible by Susan Shapiro. I'm going to type that into the chat. I think she probably does the best job of bringing people up to speed with what it takes to pitch a good personal essay, which is basically what I'm suggesting here, pitching personal essays or op-eds. I think probably this is not in a priority list. Probably the priority for me, if I were helping you with book publicity, would to focus on media coverage and outlets associated with the themes in your book, like Jewish cultural organizations. And here I would look for comp titles or comp authors by people who are writing nonfiction that tie into Jewish themes or issues, because they would have, steal ideas from other people's book marketing efforts. What are the media outlets that covered them? What are the podcasts that had them on? Who reviewed them? What social media sites were they active on? So follow that breadcrumb trail to build your own plan. And then I've kind of left this for the end, which is one of your strengths here. You do have 700 people on a newsletter list. These are people who subscribed to you through your website, which is very important that you have a website that does that. Not every author does. Some people are blogging kind of in this strange neverland that's not identified as anyone's site at all. And there's no email sign up, which makes it harder to benefit from blogging activity. But that is not you, fortunately. You've got 700 people who receive your blogs in email newsletter form. So this gives you the opportunity, maybe, to form a launch team. Now, this might sound fancy, but it's pretty straightforward. And in fact, I have a little email. Where did it go? Here it is. That I received as a newsletter subscriber to Maria Brito. So she has had a new book come out on creativity. I haven't read it, but it looks really great for those who are interested. So I got this email telling me to join the book launch team for an extra bonus. And she said, she says, I would love for you to pre-order the book today and get free access to my course, which is on creativity. But if you want to go a step further and get even more bonuses, I invite you to join my book launch team. So it requires people to pre-order the book, promote the book on social media during a specific window. And that gives people access to a creativity course and a live monthly Zoom mastermind group, et cetera. Now, this sort of thing works really well for the topic she's writing on. It might be a little harder to decide what are the bonuses going to be for a memoir, but it's limited only by your creativity or your imagination. So this is something you could consider doing, because I'm assuming those 700 people you've got are probably one of your most valuable assets, like people who have already bought in, already invested in who you are and what you do. So it's natural that you would go to them first for that support. What do you think about that? Do you think it's likely people would raise their hand?
I do think that there's a core group that would raise their hands. And I say that because people do reply to the newsletters. Many months I will get 2 or 3 emails saying, oh, I really liked this one, or thanks for writing about this, or I learned so much, or I sent a donation as you asked. Thank you for giving the contact information for my congressman. So I do have people who are sort of invested, I guess I would say.
Great.
And yes, and I can think of bonuses that I could give.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I was a presenter for 35 years. I can put together webinars on how to help other people who are going through grief, or how to help yourself when you lose a parent or any loved one. So these are some really good thoughts. Excellent.
I'm so glad you're open to it. Some people think, oh, nobody I know would help me, but it's almost never true. There's almost always someone who will help. All right. The other alternative that I wanted to mention is the old literary citizenship card. And I say that with great fondness. This is a concept that's been around for maybe a decade. And it's this idea that if you bring attention to other authors and works of literature or reading in general, it's the rising tide lifts all ships, and eventually it will be your turn, and those people will return the favor when your book comes out. It also is actually really good search engine optimization if you are doing this in blog form, meaning you're running interviews or author Q&As or book reviews at your site, because people search for author names and book titles all the time. So obviously, especially when that book is actively being marketed and promoted, like during its launch window. One of the most popular posts at my site for quite some time was I had a guest write about Stephen King's top tips or secrets for writing. I can't remember exactly what it was, but just because so many people search for Stephen King on a daily basis, I got lots of traffic to that when it was new. And then for months after, as the search traffic came in. So you can use that to your advantage. Obviously, it can be difficult to get the really big names to agree unless they're in their own marketing and promotion window, but you'd be surprised how many people will say yes if you look like an intelligent, thoughtful human being. And if they don't agree to an interview or a Q&A or whatever, you can still write a review or talk about their book. And I recommend doing this in a positive way rather than a negative way. So I think this literary citizenship method of blogging, it works for social media too, just gets your name and gets you more visible in front of people who are comparable. That's the key though. You have to research your comps, pick quality comps, read those comps, and that's no small amount of time, but most writers like to read. So it tends to fit really well into the marketing practice. All right, so I've saved, I think this is my very last slide, and then we're going to go to Q&A. I've been alluding to this fuzzy line between blogs and newsletters because I feel like there's so little that distinguishes them except for the way that they're delivered. One's on a site, the other's in an email, but otherwise it's the same content. But, there are reasons to pick one over the other, especially if you're not committed to both. So I think blogging works great when you're trying to get search traffic, when you feel like you can reach new readers, new people through Google search. And so we talked about what that looks like. It also helps you be more visible to other people who blog if that's of interest to you, because you can link to other sites and link to other blogs, and those people generally see when you're linking to them. It can be a little bit harder with newsletters, although often people figure it out, but not always. Blogging also tends to encourage sharing and linking via social media. With newsletters, less so, although I'll admit it depends on the newsletter service you're using. Some make it easier than others to link to newsletter content. And then guest posting will increase your reach and your author website search engine optimization. So if you're looking to increase your SEO generally, blogging is a wonderful way to do that, or to guest post for other blogs and make sure you get that link back to your website. For email newsletters, it's really wonderful for reaching the invested, as we just talked about with forming a launch team. It's great for announcing books coming out, news and events for people who are following the story of you and your books. I think newsletters also really help with content that's not likely to rank in search. So the people who are most invested will be more invested in personal content, the story of how the book got written, or your personal feelings about what's happening around the book, the stuff that people aren't searching for on Google, how you feel about your book. So that's great for your newsletter. That allows you to be more personal and intimate. And then you can obviously use your email newsletter to let people know about new blog posts.
Can I ask a question, Jane? When you're saying a blog, do you mean a post on any of your social media sites?
When I talk about blog posts, I'm talking about content at your website. So okay. I'll just stop the share and just for absolute clarity. So when I talk about your blog, I'm talking about this.
Okay.
At your website, on territory you own and control, that's there and is indexed by Google. When I talk about newsletter content, I'm talking about the stuff that may not surface in a Google search. Again, if you're on Substack, people can find Substack content through a Google search. But like if you start looking for electric speed content, that's my newsletter. you're not going to find it through Google search. You're just going to find basically my sign up form. So that's the distinction. And there is
so that what you have up now is considered my blog.
Yes, this is your blog.
My very boring SEO blog.
Which is housed on your author website.
Right.
Yes. All right. So
what would I do without you, Jane?
And then social media is something else entirely. That's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is you're using to talk in real time with people. Usually, and not always in real time, but more of the moment. Okay, so I see that there are quite a number of questions that are collecting in a well here, which I'm going to go through. For those of you who can't stick around for the Q&A, this is all being recorded, so you can come back if you're curious. Before I get to the Q&A, though, I just want to mention that Business Clinic runs every other month. If you would like to apply for Business Clinic, you can go to my website and you'll find a link with the application. And then my next free session is going to be on April 10, and we're going to focus on email newsletters. And it's just going to be a Q&A. I may have a few prepared remarks, but generally I'm just going to be letting it rip in the Q&A box, whatever you want to know about email newsletters, free, paid, Substack, or otherwise, I will answer. All right, so I'm going to stop the share and take a look at the Q&A here. And before I do, and out of respect to Sarah, who's here so patiently, what questions do you want answered before I go through the well?
I don't have any questions, but one thing I would like to say, it's been hard for me to keep reading what's in the chat, but I have noticed several of you giving recommendations to me for things to pursue. And I just want to say I appreciate all the suggestions that I've seen in the chat. Thank you.
I'll share those too with you, Sarah, via email so that you don't lose track of anything.
Yeah, it was hard to read them and listen to you and
yes.
Pay attention. Thank you, Jane.
So Yvonne asks, one is always told to be consistent.
Yes.
Yes, guilty.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you.
How do you find content to blog regularly? And, the more that you're involved in social media, for better or worse, I think the more ideas you get. That's my experience. It's only by engaging with other people that I tend to come up with ideas for what to write about. A lot of blogging is of the moment, meaning that 3 to 6 months from now, that post you wrote may not have any life left in it, and you may, in fact, even trash it. Not that I'm suggesting people do that, but some blog content's like that. My focus as a blogger has been on the more evergreen side, meaning I'm trying to write things that will attract search traffic for many, many months, if not years. And then I keep updating that content. I think a great blog often has a mix of those two things, where you have things that are of the moment, that feel resonant, that touch on what people are thinking about and discussing in all sorts of spaces. But then they're also doing some timeless things that are evergreen and might even be a cornerstone of what you think and believe or often tell people on a topic. The questions that you're frequently asked via email or at events, the things that people return to you for again and again and again, this makes really great fodder for your blog. Linda says, I started my blog for 2 reasons: to build a platform as a debut author and looking for an agent or publisher, and then the other to share experiences living with epilepsy and to support others like me. Those are great reasons to blog. If it sounds, Linda, like you have a really focused topic there, a very specific audience and an idea of what that audience looks like, so that gives you a strong foundation for doing the research steps that I recommended, like whether that's at SparkToro or just doing some Googling around, like through Google News or Google Trends. I didn't show you Google Trends, but that's another fun one, free to go into and search for phrases and terms that relate to what you're writing about and see what the hot topics are. Just make sure maybe I should do a little screen share and show people what that looks like. Give me just a second. bringing it up now. Okay, so this is the Google Trends site. And I don't know, I have no idea what will come up if I search for epilepsy, but let's give it a shot. I'm just going to stay broad for the moment. So you're going to get these trend lines from Google about the term that you put in. We're not so interested in the trend lines. We're actually interested in what's going on below the fold, which apparently there's an American actor, Cameron Boyce. It's mentioning breakout related topics. So I don't know, is Cameron Boyce, I don't know who that is. I hope I'm not.
He died.
He died.
Looks
okay.
Like Number 5 says, how did he die?
Oh, how did he die? Okay. So I'm not in touch with this current topic, but.
This is a grief topic.
Is it? Let's see. Cameron Boyce. Just want to see who this is since I don't know. Oh, how sad. Okay.
Oh, he's young.
Very young. So this
20. Oh my God.
So this is exactly what we're hoping to, like, not a sad story, but Google Trends surfaces for you things that you might not have thought about writing about that tie into your topic. So if you just go through the related queries and related topics, you can gather so many ideas for what you might blog about. There's some other names coming up. Keto diet. I have no idea. Maybe there are issues related. These two topics seem to be tied together. So there you go. I hope that helps for those of you wondering what to write about.
That was amazing, Jane.
Free tool. LK says, for those of us who don't yet have an audience, how do you gain traction for your blog or for your Twitter presence, for that matter? Blogs do have to be marketed, and the number one way to do that is primarily through social media. And I know if you don't have a social media presence, it feels like a chicken and egg problem. Time takes care of part of this issue, but I think you'll also want to use SparkToro, as I demonstrated, to figure out, okay, who are the people that reach your audience currently? Can you start following them? Can you start engaging with them? Commenting, responding to their Twitter threads, for example, is one way to get things going. There are some very specific newsletters that offer a lot of help on Twitter, especially about how to grow your following there. The newsletter is called, let me just make sure I'm getting this right, because it's a little bit of a weird name. It's called Hype. Let's see now. Hype Fury newsletter. Hold on. I'm gonna make sure that I get this right. Yes, hold on. I'm putting this link into the chat for those of you still with us. So these are tips to grow your Twitter following. I think you can sign up for the newsletter version that gets sent maybe every week or so. I find it super useful. All right. Cynthia says, when you talk about blogging, where should you post them? Cynthia says, I blog to my website, which doesn't have much traffic, then promote to LinkedIn and Facebook. I've been reluctant to see analytics on my site as I fear if my blogging isn't growing my audience, I will be discouraged. Indeed, yes. So when I talk about blogging, I am talking about having it on your own site. And the purpose is to increase your traffic, and hopefully you can increase traffic not just through the social media marketing, but also through the search engine traffic that we talked about. You need both in the end. You need social media to kick things off and to get that first run of traffic. And then hopefully if you've been blogging about things that have that SEO potential, you'll start getting traffic that way. If you're not getting the traffic you want from search, then I would say, can you get more narrow or specific with the topics that you're blogging about? Can you think about literary citizenship topics like the names, the authors, the books that might help attract some people to you? Elizabeth asks, I started blogging to build interest and contacts for a new book as opposed to having a book complete and ready to market. Maybe not an effective strategy, she wonders. I don't I don't think there's a right or a wrong sequence of events here. And so much depends on your category as well. So I think it's very common for nonfiction writers to do a lot of testing and marketing and audience engagement on their blog or website or on social in order to refine their message to make sure that they're going to write a book that will actually help people. If you're writing novels, though, and to some extent memoir falls into this category too, I would consider, Elizabeth, your activities to be literary citizenship. So it never hurts. And you always want to have people who can help you market your book when the time comes. No book gets marketed in a vacuum. You do not want to market a book by yourself. So I would say that what you're doing has value, but don't put off writing your book for too long. Ken asks if the audience for a blog really needs to be as large as I've suggested. That's a lot of eyeballs. I would say that, you want to see hundreds of visits per day if you want it to have an effect. But if you're doing it for other reasons, as, like I said, creativity, practice, it's not going to matter as much. But if you want, what I'm most concerned about, especially for Sarah, is if she's going to be putting a lot of time and energy in the next 6 months into her blog, I would hate for that to take away from book marketing efforts that could sell more copies in the end. So, this is why I brought up the size issue, is because you have to take that into account if you're going to be funneling a lot of time and energy into it to market something, but you're talking into a room of nobody listening. That can be very depressing. JA wonders if you should have comments open for blogs. JA got spam comments, turned them off, which happens to many people. You're not alone. I would say if you can leave them on, please leave them on. There are tools usually to limit the spam. Akismet is one of the best tools if you're on WordPress. Also, usually blogging platforms like WordPress will have different ways of making it harder for people to comment without passing a few hurdles. Like maybe they have to enter in their email address, or maybe they can't have any links in the comments. So you can set up controls to ensure that only the valued comments get through. The nice thing about comments, well, there are two really nice things about comments. One is that it's exciting, I think. So it's still exciting to me when people comment on blog posts. It's engagement. It's an opportunity to see what other people are thinking. Sometimes it's like market research. But also it helps people stay on the site longer, which leads to better SEO for the site. So the site becomes more sticky. People spend more minutes or seconds, as the case might be, on the site, either writing the comment or reading the comments, and that improves the overall site quality in Google's eyes. Alice wonders if there's a cost to SparkToro. There is a cost. I find it pretty reasonable. Like for writers, I think the cost is reasonable if you're just doing it for a month and you can buy it just for a month. You don't have to buy into a really expensive subscription package. They do give you some free searches to start, which you might be able to get your research done with just the free version. Anita wonders, if you interview someone for your blog, do you need them to sign a permission agreement? I've never done that because I don't intend to reuse the material in any other manner. So as long as they understand the purpose of the interview, that it's going to appear on my blog, it's basically an email handshake. We all understand what we're participating in. But if you're then going to like reprint that in a book or do all these other things, you may want to take the extra step of saying, I may do these other things with this content. You don't have to state what they are, but just say that you have, non-exclusive rights to put the material in a book or do whatever it is that you might envision. Okay, and I'm just going to go through what some of the other questions might be and see if there's anything I definitely want to touch on. As Cynthia says, she's an executive director of a nonprofit, blogging for that nonprofit on inattentive ADHD. She has a book coming out, but doesn't have time to create and maintain an author website. She's wondering if she can achieve a similar result with the website for the Inattentive ADHD Coalition. I mean, you can, everything I've discussed here applies to any type of site, whether it's an author website or an organization website, or just a blog focused site where there's really nothing else but the blog. But I think blogs always work best when they're housed under the auspices of something like an author website or an organization website. So I hope that answers the question, Cynthia. Let's see. Stan wonders what's the best platform to blog on if you don't need or want a full website. I would probably consider WordPress if you're not put off by the learning curve that some people think is there. And, you know, this is going to sound counterintuitive for a class on blogging, but Substack to me is like a blog. Even though it's sent out via email, it kind of compiles information like a blog in reverse chronological order. And when I go and visit a Substack on the Substack website, it's very bloggy in its presentation. So you might want to consider Substack, which is free, and the tech, no one has problems using it. Like it's very accessible. You don't have, there's no learning curve to it. Dana wonders if I have thoughts on using sites like Medium as your platform. I'm not a huge fan of Medium because I'm not sure how stable it is. It's been around for 10 years now and it keeps pivoting, and I think the money has run out. And so I just have this concern that if you start putting your eggs in the Medium basket, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now or 10 years from now, it's going to disappear. So I'm always cognizant with blogging and email that these two things are usually long-term investments. So if you build on a platform that has an uncertain future, you're risking that investment. So if you're just doing it kind of, I don't know, informally experimenting, you're not that invested in it, I don't have a problem with Medium. But just be aware that I don't know how long it is for this world. Oh, Laura mentions Medium just got 10 million investment. Well, I still have really radical doubts that it will survive. I think they're throwing good money after bad. Okay. Well, we're now at about the 90-minute mark, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all of the questions, but I hope this session has been helpful in figuring out how you want to answer this question. Everyone who's attending, whether blogging is for you, yes or no. I think the answer can change over time, of course. And I would say that if you're still unsure after today, I would say your answer is no, just because I would say you want to have that fire inside that like even if I told you no, that wouldn't stop you. You would still just go right ahead with it. I think that's the kind of enthusiasm and energy you want to have a successful blog. So Sarah, anything else from you before we wrap this up?
No, just a huge thank you to you, Jane. Like I said, I wish I had done this with you a year ago. I wouldn't have such boring and consistent titles. I really appreciate your having me on, and thank you so very much. I've gained an awful lot already from these last 90 minutes.
Wonderful. It's my pleasure. And everyone, the recording will be posted by tomorrow at my YouTube channel, and you'll receive an email reminder if you need it. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody.